So today I'm joined by TaRessa Stovall, and we're going to be talking about writing memoir. Now, this is a topic that's really close to both of our hearts, and we've both got new releases out this year, which are memoir. So my new release is Captive, and this is a memoir in poetry about my experiences with brain inflammation, OCD, and psychosis. And here it is. So. Yeah. Now, TaRessa, do you just want to introduce your memoir too, before we really get into the topic of actually writing memoir?
Yes, thank you so much, Madeline, and congratulations on Captive. I can't wait
Thank
to
you.
read it.
Thank
Yes, I
you.
can't wait to read it. Hello, everyone. My new memoir, which came out in early April 2020, is titled Swirl Girl, Coming of Race in the USA. Swirl Girl, Coming of Race in the USA. So it's a book about the evolution of racial identity, both of me, myself as an individual, against the backdrop of my country that I was growing up in, which was growing through its own versions of the same thing.
Yeah, I'm so excited to read your book because I've read the excerpt from it that you sent me before. So yeah, I just need to read the whole thing now, and I'm really interested to know about what motivated you to write Swallow Girl.
Well, what motivated me to write this memoir? I've written a lot of books. I've written fiction, nonfiction, participated in co-editing anthologies, and I'm not a memoirist, and I had
Okay.
no desire to write a memoir. So there were three things that motivated me to write Swirl Girl, Coming of Race in the USA. Number one was a long time concern and passion about writing something, creating something, putting something in the world that could be used by younger mixed race people as they were coming of race and coming of age, that was different than the single story that exists everywhere. There's only one story about mixed race people, particularly if your mix includes Black, and that's anywhere in the world. And that is that you're tragic and you're confused and you're rejected by everyone and your life is just woe is me. And that is literally, up until very recent years, the only narrative that exists and has ever existed. And it's not accurate, it's not representative, but more to the point for people like us, it's not useful or empowering at all. It's actually either neutral, annoying, or damaging. So ever since I was a teenager, and this is all spelled out in the book, I've had a desire to somehow create something that counters the narrative. That's the first thing that made me want to write Swirl Girl. The second thing that made me want to write Swirl Girl, that actually planted the seeds to make me take action, although it was several years before I started writing it, was the very historic 2008 election of the nation's first biracially Black president, Barack Obama, who in his very first public address, very first time he was on camera and mic after this world-shaking election, with the eyes and the ears of the world upon him, was talking casually about getting his daughters a dog. He promised them a dog if he won. They were very young then. And he referred to himself as a mutt. And when he referred to himself as a mutt, my whole world stopped. I had to stop working on the business project I was working on with several friends that we've been working on for months and put lots of money into. My whole world stopped and crashed in that moment. And I realized my ancestors were like, look, you don't like it, you better do something about it. And the third thing that made me write Swirl Girl when I did was that, again, for the first time in my life, and I'm in my mid-60s, there is a public ongoing conversation about mixed race people and identity, largely due to the digital world and social media. Unfortunately, though, mixed race people are rarely invited or even welcomed into that conversation. People feel very comfortable talking about us and at us, but don't welcome our voices into the conversation. And Swirl Girl is just one of the many things I will do to hack the conversation and break in.
Okay, yeah. So your book is very much about identity and the experience of being mixed race. So
Yeah.
how has your life been impacted, would you say, by the constant question of what are you?
Well, I mean, that's answered in detail in the book. How my life has been impacted, Madeline, a couple things. Um, I am mixed race, and what I discovered in writing the book is that I'm a member of what I call the trifecta. So I have three aspects that came together to really impact my life. I am mixed race, I am extremely light skinned, and I am phenomenally racially ambiguous looking. Okay. So not all mixed people are light skinned. Not all light skinned people are mixed race. Not all light skinned and or mixed race people are racially ambiguous looking. Not all racially ambiguous looking people are very light skinned or mixed race. I am all three. So what I realized, what I'd never really analyzed before or thought about consciously while writing the book and while planning the book, I had to look at each of those three things and how they impacted me. Being mixed race technically has impacted me the least. So I would say that's number three. Number two is being light skinned.
Okay.
Once you figure that out, the dynamics of colorism, which of course are just part of systemic racism all over the world, once you figure that out as a person, how to navigate that, it's not necessarily, it's constant, but it's not unpredictable. It's easy to predict. Being racially ambiguous looking, for me, has been much more, it's dominated my life much more. Every single person I encounter every single day of my life, it's an issue. It's an issue. And so it's
Right.
there. And in addition to which, many people assume I am different things. That has done everything from threaten my physical safety in my life. And I welcome anybody to go through a US airport with me and see what that's like. You know, I mean, it's just a lot. It's a lot. So the being ambiguous looking is, for me, has dominated far more of my life. But in terms of being mixed race and identity, I am Black and Jewish and Native American. And so, you know, the specifics of that combination, I am from and grew up in Seattle, Washington, in the Pacific Northwest part of the USA, which never had legal Jim Crow segregation like the US South did. And I grew up during that time. I was almost grown when interracial marriages became legal throughout the US. And when sanctioned, you know, Jim Crow's legal segregation ended. So I grew up with those dynamics, although I didn't grow up in the South. So I didn't experience the segregation firsthand. But all of those things blended together. Also, it's important to tell people, when my mother was growing up and when I was growing up, Jews were not classified as white yet, like they are now. Jews were not white like they are now. So I always have to explain that to people, because if they're younger or if they just didn't know that, for context. So I'm not Black and white, you know, but which is, you know, a whole nother combination with very different dynamics. But I would say, you know, it dominates every aspect of your life. But the bigger picture is, Madeline, for every person of color, their identity dominates every aspect of their life. So it dominates it not so much because I'm mixed, but because I'm not white.
Yeah. Okay, so how do you define strong, healthy, and positive mixed race identity? And how would you say that your journey differs from the typical mixed race narrative that dominates our culture?
Great questions. Strong, healthy, positive mixed race identity for me is, number one, you are grounded and rooted in truth.
Okay.
And truth means the facts of your ancestry. Now, that doesn't mean you have to like all of your ancestral strains or all of your ancestors or cultures or countries or whatever, religions. It doesn't mean that, but it means you need to understand it and understand something about those histories and those cultures, because that's your context and that's what makes you you.
Yeah.
I think that's number one. I think number two, and there are so many variables here, but the short version is that you accept yourself as you are. And all of the aspects, all of them, what I call mosaic tiles that make up your identity, and your identity can be fluid, okay? That you accept them and that you let go of the need for anybody else to accept them or approve of you. And that's hard. That's I think the hardest thing, and it's very rare. So many people are like, well, people tell me I'm this, and I'm like, don't listen to them. Just don't listen to them. Don't let anybody tell you. That's my personal working definition of a strong, healthy identity, is that you empower yourself to define it and live it on your own terms.
Yeah.
And how, yes. And my journey differs from typical mixed race narrative, because I grew up in a city where there was a lot of racial mixing, and in a community that was created very consciously. And so I had a lot of peers who were mixed race. So there was never a sense of even being unusual, to be honest, let alone being strange or an outcast or different. Very few people have that experience. And in writing the book, I came to understand that I have phenomenal privilege in that area, and probably less than 1% of mixed race people have that. And I grew up in a very diverse area, So I would say it differs because I was not rejected. I was never confused, and there is no tragedy. The only tragedy that exists is the existence of systemic racism. And that's a tragedy for everybody on the receiving end, no matter where they fall on the spectrum.
Yeah.
So Madeline, let's get to the good stuff. I would love to know all about your journey up to and through living and writing captive. What motivated you to write this amazing book?
Yeah, so writing this collection was quite strange, really, because when I wrote the first draft of these poems, I didn't know that I was writing a memoir that would one day be published. So it's all about the brain inflammation that I had. Well, I still have it now because it's a chronic problem. And the type of brain inflammation I have is called autoimmune encephalitis basal ganglia. Well, autoimmune basal ganglia encephalitis, also known as PANS when it happens in children. And it's where the immune system mistakenly attacks the brain, and it causes a host of symptoms, both neurological and psychiatric. And I'm disabled anyway, so I remember when I first got all these symptoms, doctors just sort of weren't that interested into looking into why this was happening, and they just said that it was basically just anxiety, because they just said, oh, it's just sort of the frustration that I've got, sort of when my body doesn't work properly, and that is how my body is now displaying it. But yeah, so all this brain inflammation happened overnight. I went to bed and I was fine, and then I woke up the next day feeling really strange, and I was hallucinating. I couldn't balance. I kept falling over, and it was a really terrifying time. And then I developed severe OCD and I had double vision. And yeah, I just didn't know what was happening to me, and doctors were really baffled. And yeah, like I said, they just thought it was anxiety, because I was 23 when this happened and I'd been disabled since I was 17. So they said, oh well, it's still you're still getting used to sort of your body working this way. So they said, oh, it's just sort of a delayed reaction to all of that. But I was sure that something more was going on, because I just couldn't see how sort of I felt like I had become a different person, literally overnight. So yeah, I was misdiagnosed for 6 months. They just said it was anxiety and just sort of regular OCD. And during that time, the brain inflammation actually worsened to the point where I couldn't communicate verbally. And I couldn't tell my family how I was feeling, and I was just feeling worse and worse. And it was a really lonely time. And now I'm a young adult fiction writer, but the brain inflammation stole my ability to write. I tried to do it, but I couldn't. And I remember feeling so angry with myself because I was changing, and it just felt like no one was sort of believing me, and so no one was helping me understand what was happening, and I just felt really alone. So yeah, I started writing out a few images one day, just on my phone, and I think it was just maybe 10 words, because that was the sort of most that I could manage to do in a whole day. And it took me a long time, but by the end of it, when I had these 10 words I'd written, I just felt this huge sense of accomplishment, because I'd written out the complexity of my feelings in through this image that I'd been working on all day. And it was really fragmented, and it was nothing that I'd written before. But for the next month or so, I just kept doing that, and I just add them to the same note on my phone, and like I began to think of it as like one big therapy poem, because like it was just so fragmentary and like none of it really connected or made sense. But doing it really helped me maintain my identity as a writer, especially when I felt like I completely lost myself. So yeah, 6 months into all of this, I was correctly diagnosed with brain inflammation, and the NHS started me on treatment. And as my brain began to heal, I got back my ability to communicate. So I was able to write prose again, like my novels, but I kept writing these therapy poems because they just really allowed me to capture everything I'd been feeling. And this was the first time that I'd actually written poetry, because like I've never really sort of tried writing any poetry before that. Like when I was at university, I studied creative writing for a little bit, as part of an English literature degree. And I remember like we'd have sort of these seminars on poetry, and every time it was on poetry, I was just thinking, oh no, I want it to be on prose and fiction. But I sort of like was trying to sort of recall these sort of poetic techniques I'd been taught there. And yeah, like it wasn't until quite a while later that I actually decided to turn these therapy poems into a collection. And it was the need to like raise awareness for encephalitis and neuropsychiatric illnesses that really motivated me to do that.
Wow, Madeline, that is, I mean, it's obviously an amazing story just in and of itself,
Thank
but
you.
oh, you're welcome. My goodness. But what you just shared, I think really illustrates the power of two things:
Okay.
of the human spirit when the body is not being your friend, to put it
Mm-hmm.
lightly, of the human spirit, the and while your brain was under attack, your spirit still gave your brain something magical and something, even though it was different and unfamiliar to you, and combined with the healing power of art, of the
Yeah.
creative process coming through you, and the fact that you are such a creative soul that even your brain being practically shut down or diminished, or or anything like that, didn't stop that spirit from coming through. And it seems like that's been very instrumental in, along with the medical treatments, which thank God you got the appropriate ones, along with those, in your healing, would you
Yeah,
say?
definitely. Yeah. Yeah, because like being able to sort of like keep writing, and it really helped me sort of maintain my identity as a writer and feel that I was still myself, and that I hadn't like changed beyond recognition. But even just sort of like the actual writing of these poems, it was so therapeutic, and it really helped me process everything and understand everything to a degree that I hadn't been able to do before that. So it really helped. Yeah. So yeah, how long have you been working on your memoir then?
Oh, my memoir. That's a great question, Madeline. My memoir took 5 years, and I didn't know how long it was going to take. I had never written memoir before, and
Mhm.
I've written fiction and I've written nonfiction. I've been a novelist, a journalist, a professional blogger, and I have a lot of different, like many of us, writing skill sets. Memoir was not among those, but I knew I had to write this memoir, and so I would say it took 5 years, which is amazing to me, but it went through many incarnations. I had 2 rounds of beta readers. I
Mhm.
got a lot of feedback and a lot of critique on this book, and it took so long because for me it was very challenging to shape and curate my own very subjective personal journey in life for consumption by people who would probably never meet me.
Mhm.
And so because something in memoir, what's interesting is just because something was meaningful to you or interesting or whatever, doesn't mean they're going to find it meaningful or interesting or whatever. So you've got the curation of my life, and then shaping it for public consumption took me 5 years.
So was that really different to how you would go about writing a novel then? Sort of, did you notice any similarities between the two, like in the actual writing process?
The actual writing process, while memoir was not, I wasn't fluent in memoir, and I had to study it.
Mhm.
What was familiar, and what I do think, based on the feedback I'm getting for Swole Girl, um, makes it work for people is that I brought fiction writing and journalistic techniques. So
Right.
once I did what was for me the hard, very unfamiliar, really scary work of curating, then once I was in my probably eighth or ninth rewrite, I went through many rewrites. Eighth or ninth rewrite, I was able to start saying, okay, this can be made more compelling with this fiction writing or journalistic technique. And journalistically, what I did was one thing I did was throughout the book, sprinkled throughout the chapters, is in the words of the United States government and the United States Census, how the U.S. Census has categorized race from its beginning in the 1700s through this year, and how the categories have changed. So you can see the manipulation, basically, it's manipulation, how they categorize people. Number one, and then number two, because I'm a baby boomer and I was coming of age, you know, against the backdrop of some very dramatic events, beginning with Dr. King's assassination and the riots that followed, and the changing of laws and everything, Black Power, civil rights movements, Vietnam War protests, you know, the women's movement, all those things. Journalistically, those skills came in handy.
Right.
So that it blends the journalism, and then I tried to use the fiction writing techniques just to make it more interesting to read, quite frankly.
So I don't know, did you find it quite difficult to work out what exactly you wanted to say then? Sort of like when you were drafting? Because I know that's one thing that, like, because I'm working on another memoir as well, and I found that I'm finding it really hard to work out what exactly it is that I'm trying to say in sort of my new one.
You're doing another memoir?
Yeah.
You are much braver than I am. No, seriously, I don't ever want to do memoir again. It was excruciatingly difficult. It was painful in every possible way. It was torture. It was torture. I mean, and I'm not exaggerating. Like I said, I think there are a lot of people who are natural memoirists. I am not. It does not come naturally to me. And it was hard. And what was hard was that for so long, and that's why I use beta readers and other people for feedback, was that, as I say to this day, I have no perspective on any of this. I can't step away and say, oh, this is strong, this is weak, this needs to be made better. What to say, how to say it. Also, how to portray the people in the book who are alive and still in my life.
Yeah.
And there's two friends who passed away right before, while I was writing the book, who are in the book by name. I gave people a choice. When I first started working, I called up like childhood friends and stuff, and I said, look, I'm going to write a memoir. You want me to use your real name or a fake name? So they're in there with the real names. With the two who passed away, I am friends with their daughters, their grown daughters. And so I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about, what is my brother going to think? My brother liked it. Right now, I'm really nervous because my daughter, who was in the book and who was an author and a literary agent, and who gave me the first piece of feedback on the book when I only had written 3 chapters, that was so profound and on point, I stopped writing for 6 months to do the homework she gave me, and she was in college, undergrad at the time, okay, to completely restructure the book before I'd even written it. She ordered a copy. I was like, how did you know? Oh, I Googled you, Mom. It wasn't hard. I am literally terrified because her critique is going to be not just as my kid. So hopefully she won't hate what I wrote about her and her brother, but who knows? She'll let me know. But is it as an author and a writer, her critique, whatever it is going to be so on point. So that's it. But that was so hard. How about for you?
Yeah, well, in my poetry collection, because it's very much based on therapy writings, it's very sort of like internal to me. So, I mean, one thing that I did find when I was writing Captive, it's taught me that I've got this story that I need to tell, but I need to write it like in a more traditional narrative form as well. So that's why I'm working on this second memoir now, because there's so much this poetry collection doesn't show, just because it's like based on the therapy poems. So there's not much contextual information about my illness, but you also don't see my family and friends' reactions. You don't see everything that they're sort of doing in this huge battle that I've had just to get the treatment, because it's been quite political in a way, the battle as well. So that does sort of like bring up challenges and sort of how I'm going to write that, and some of the way that I was treated by like medical professionals due to being like female, disabled, and like one doctor did diagnose me with conversion disorder, and at one point just said that everything was just all in my head and that there was nothing wrong. And then I had brain scans done to like prove that there was like this problem, but then the brain scans kept going missing. So there's this whole, so there's a lot of stuff going on like behind the scenes that none of this comes up in my poetry memoir. So yeah, that's sort of like really what's motivating me to sort of write this like longer piece. And it's all going to be about like the huge battle that I've had to get treatment, as well as these. So it's like split into two halves. You've got the first half of when I'm developing this illness and how it's like really lonely and isolating and confusing because no one knows what's going on. And then you've got the second part where I'm sort of like battling to get treatment. And even once I've got a diagnosis, it's just so hard to find people who will treat me because it's just so rare. And like because of a pandemic and the strain on the NHS at the moment, my treatment's now been delayed, so I'm having to switch to a private doctor. And there's just so much more that I found that I need to say about this time in my life, because like it's undoubtedly the darkest time that I've experienced, and writing about it is like it's me claiming it as my own, and I found it's very empowering. So yeah, writing Captive has taught me that I do need to write about it more, but I need to write about it in a more analytical way. And like I've interviewed other people for it, so like family and friends. So it's in a way because like my family and friends know that they're appearing in it, and I'm sort of like asking them for like direct quotes from them, because my memory is not reliable now, and I can't remember a lot of these sort of like episodes of psychosis that I had, and like I've got about 2 months that have just gone completely. So I'm reconstructing that in this new memoir based on everything that like the people around me are telling me. So in a way, I'm like, I haven't sort of got this worry about sort of portraying people like in a way that they wouldn't like, because they're having to tell me what happened anyway. But yeah, it does sort of bring up all these sort of like notions of like memory and unreliability, and how you even tell a story sort of objectively like this. So yeah, that's sort of like the biggest challenge that I'm having so far, like in my new memoir. And yeah, I'm also using it to sort of like expose the stigma around mental health and psychosis in particular, and there's like discussions on gender politics within the medical field as well. So yeah, it's just really important for me to tell my story in sort of this longer way, because like writing Captive helped me at the time when the brain inflammation was extremely bad, but it's like it's taught me that I've got more of my story that I need to tell. So yeah, I'd say sort of like that's sort of the main thing. Like writing Captive has taught me, like I knew what I wanted to say in Captive, but it also has taught me that I can't just stop at that. I need to talk about more. So yeah, and I've always found that writing memoir is all about discovery as well. And this is something that I've talked about a lot with other memoirists too recently. So I was speaking to Sue Williams Silverman, and she's got 4 memoirs out. So like I was sort of going to her for like some sort of like advice on how to like approach this like memoir, because like I'm just thinking it was like this huge daunting project in a way. And I remember her saying that she always writes about her obsessions, as doing so allows her to understand them more. And this is definitely something I've realised that I do in writing a memoir. So yeah, like I've got Captive, and that's based on the therapy poems that I wrote at the time of this severe brain inflammation. And these poems are all about me sort of like understanding what was happening to me. And then later, when I decided I would release them as a collection, like editing it led me to so many new discoveries about myself. So I remember discovering these common threads that sort of ran through all my episodes of psychosis, and I wasn't aware of those before that. So like birds was like this huge thing that I was just hallucinating all the time. Like I'd be convinced they'd be flying around me, I'd hear them, I'd see them, I'd feel their wings like brushing past me as they flew around me. And it felt so realistic, like I couldn't tell the difference. But yeah, reading the poems that I'd written like as a whole collection allowed me to see how birds had this sort of presence in all of my poems, even the ones that weren't actually about these sort of psychosis episodes. So I've got this one poem in the collection that's a prose poem, and it describes sort of a journey that I had to take in a horse lorry. So I live on a farm and we've got horses, and this day that the poem's talking about, two of our horses were being transported to an equine hospital because one of their foals was really unwell. And I was traveling with them because I was the only one sort of like on the farm that day who could go. And I was like greatly unwell, and like I'd only just started the treatment for the brain inflammation. And this poem sort of looks at everything happening around me in that horse lorry and how disconnected I felt to myself. And yeah, when I was editing it, I realized it was almost as if I was looking down on myself and flying around and zooming into little things like all around me. And yeah, when I was editing it, I just realized I'd written it pretty much as if I was a bird, like looking down at everything and flying around, even though it's actually written in first person. So there's this real sense of disconnection and lack of feeling, and that does carry through a lot of the collection. Um, this idea that I'm free in that sense, sort of witnessing everything that's happened to me, but at the same time, I've got that sense of freedom because I was disassociating at that point, because it's really early on in my treatment. And I think that was when I'd only just sort of got back my ability to like speak verbally as well. So, and like that is something that I still struggle with. So like I keep getting sort of mixed up with words like even now. But I remember when I was sort of like sitting in front of a horse lorry with the driver, I was just trying to like pretend I was completely normal and didn't tell them anything about like all of this that was going on. And I was just trying to sort of like think, are they gonna like think that I'm grounded in my own body, or are they gonna think I'm sort of like flying around everywhere? Because I just felt that I wasn't grounded at all. But then, yeah, other times I really felt like a prisoner. So hence the title of the collection, Captive. And yeah, reading the collection as a whole just really made me sort of like understand these themes that I'd written about sort of unconsciously. Because like when I was doing these therapy writings, I wasn't sort of like paying really close attention to like language and structure and like motifs and reoccurring images. They just happened naturally. So yeah, the different like constructs of freedom and my thoughts surrounding it was something that I discovered in my process of putting together this collection. So yeah, that's one of the discoveries that I made. And yeah, talking to Sue William Silverman really helped me realize that writing memoir is all about making these discoveries about yourself and understanding everything to like a deeper layer and a deeper meaning. So what sort of discoveries did you make in the process of writing your memoir?
I think the discoveries that I made, Madeline, the things that surprised me, that I learned or discovered. One is that because there is now an ongoing public conversation and exploration of mixed race identity in the world, which has only existed for maybe about a decade. I'm in a lot of different mixed groups on Facebook.
Okay.
And also a lot of Black Jewish, or what I call bluish groups on Facebook. And I'm usually one of the older people in the group. So there's many generations of people in this group, many in the mixed groups, many different kinds of mixes, people from all over the world. And then people who are what we call multi-generational mix, who might be 6 or 8 or 10 things. If you say, what are you? They're like, da 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 da. And so I've learned so much from the people in these groups. Often I've debated with them, argued with them, talked about different concepts or terminologies, or sometimes just given my perspective as someone from a different generation. But the main thing that I've learned that I really was not consciously aware of until recently and until writing the book was how privileged I was to grow up the way that I did, and especially with all of the credit in the world to my late Jewish mother, Russian Jewish mother. Father was Black and Native American. How privileged I was, because my mother made it a point to have my brother and I grow up in an environment that was very Black, that was very diverse. She gave us some tools with which to navigate identity, but more than anything else, she was personally an example of how you have an honest, strong sense of self, and yet have the fluidity to relate in a positive way to all kinds of other people from all kinds of backgrounds. And I didn't realize that was unusual. I really didn't. I thought, you know, when you grow up, you kind of generally think everybody kind of, you know, has it like you do. I didn't know that was unusual. And then the other thing I've learned, and I'm still learning, is for the younger people who are specifically biracial, two races, black and white, in the United States, who are younger, how many of them grow up with, usually the mother is the white parent, with just their mothers. Often the father is not in the picture, and they grow up in completely or predominantly white areas and contexts and environments. And I did not realize how common that is. It is not an experience I can relate to in any way, but I'm fascinated by it. I'm learning from it. And I'm truly shocked again at how common it is. And I'm just starting to really understand the struggles that people in that group have that I know nothing about.
Yeah.
How diverse the mixed experiences, even if we're technically the same or similar mixes, and even if we look similar, those kinds of things, our experiences can be so radically different.
Yeah, and like I think memoirs are really highlights how sort of like these different things that you come across when you're researching, and like even if you're not intending to sort of like research and find out different things, they do all come together. And so would you say that those discoveries sort of like influenced any specific parts of your book? Is that something that you've brought into your story in a way, just to like show that there are sort of these other mixed race experiences that you can't relate to yourself personally due to like different upbringings?
I didn't really bring that into the book.
Okay.
I mean, because it's the book, the story about me really ends in 2008.
Okay.
For the most part, with a couple exceptions. And also because that's so recent, and I believe that is not my story to tell. The journalist in me is, you know, is interested and wants to ask questions and investigate and do research. And I get it. I get the baseline dynamic. I just didn't know that it was so common, so prevalent, and and the differences in how those folks have to struggle to reconcile, because unlike me, technically, you know, they are of both the colonizer and the colonized, the slave owner and the slave, even though that isn't the dynamic of their actual conception. That still is their ancestral story at some level. And the world is just as racist now as it ever was. The US is just as racist now as it ever was. And so they have a tightrope walk that they have to do while confronting themselves. And many of these young people get DNA testing, you know, and all those kinds of things as well. And so they're grappling with and wrestling. I look forward to their stories so I can continue to learn from them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, sort of like I know when I've been doing research for like my narrative memoir, I've been sort of like talking to other people with the same type of brain inflammation that I've had. And because like I've interviewed several people like directly for my book, because I've been trying to show that my experiences of this brain inflammation and how I've been treated by medical professionals isn't sort of a like one-off case. So I have been bringing in sort of like other people's stories, sort of like weaving them into sort of my main narrative. But I feel sort of that my new memoir is like this huge amalgamation of all different things, because as I said, I've got this sort of like 2-month gap where like I can't remember anything, and all I've got from that time that is like a first-hand experience are the therapy poems I wrote in that time. So like although I'm sort of like interviewing family and friends and getting sort of like their feedback on what happened to sort of construct a story, I am also including these poems as well, some of them into this new memoir. And then I've got sort of like these interviews, I've got my medical letters, some of them are being featured, I've got sort of things that doctors said to me. And in a way, I'm sort of thinking of it like a bit like a patchwork in a way. But so like on the one hand, it's really focused on me, but then at the same time, it's focused on other people too, with how they were experiencing it, like even if they were experiencing it secondhand through me or directly themselves. So yeah, I just feel that I've got like a lot in this memoir at the moment, and like I'm hoping that this one is going to finish at the point where I'm sort of like getting a permanent treatment option, which should actually start happening in the next couple of months. And Yeah, so I know that like that is sort of like the end point at where I want to end sort of this new memoir. But because I'm still very much living the story now, I'm finding that quite weird, sort of like writing about it in this
Yeah.
way whilst it is still ongoing. So at the moment, I'm just writing down absolutely everything, and like I'm already way over the word count limit that my agent has like said that she wants sort of a solid draft to be, and but it's like I don't know which things that I've written so far will be important once I've got to the end of the story and know like the final shape of it, because I think that is then going to really influence which of the earlier sections I include. But I know that one thing I am like really worried about with this new memoir is sort of the portrayal of myself in it, because obviously I'm writing about myself when I was like psychotic, and my behavior was like I felt possessed and I was a very different person. So if I put this memoir out there, I'm just really worried that I'm just making myself really vulnerable to sort of like others sort of like perception of me.
Yes.
And I feel that like I need to do it because I need to be like really honest about what I experienced, like not just on like a personal level myself, but with sort of like the wider sort of like political implications of it as well. But yeah, I'm just really like worried. Like I know when Captive released, I was really terrified about putting so much of myself, because like therapy writings are so personal, and I was really worried about releasing that into a sphere where I'd have no control over it. So is this something that you've experienced as well? Like, were you apprehensive, like on a personal level, or like I know you've said you sort of worried because you had written like about your family and that, and then they'd be reading it. But did you feel that you'd made yourself vulnerable too in writing it?
I did feel that I made myself. I think any memoir, if it's good and honest and true,
Mhm.
yes. And I knew that, and I wrestled with it. Your situation is, I think, much more profound than mine. In that, yes, I was making myself very vulnerable. Um, I didn't. The reason I think I didn't worry about it is because I've completed most of the journey that I wrote about. The aspects of it that I wrote about are complete,
Mhm.
and my sense of identity. So it's really how I got to where I am. I think yours is different, but I also know that in memoir, and this is what I was thinking as you were talking just now about yours, and this is kind of the irony maybe, and one of the crazy things about memoir is the more raw and the more vulnerable you are and the bigger risks you take, the better and more powerful and valuable to other people the book is.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
I mean, I completely understand where you're coming from. Like, oh my God, people are going to think but the thing we know about memoir is it can't read like, a PR puff piece.
Mhm.
And so you got to, yeah, like you said, is what do I expose? Yours is much more daring, I think, than mine, because the things you're writing about are much more profound, to be honest. But I think that I want to encourage you to do it, and I'm hoping and gambling that your agent and your editor and your whole team will protect you. Like they'll know where to draw lines. They'll know where to, maybe say it a tiny bit differently. And those nuances of maybe say it a tiny bit differently end up being huge in the latter part of your revisions and rewrites and tweaks,
Mhm.
right? So that you can live with what's on the page and what people might think, but you also can't control what people might think or might feel. You can't control that. That, I
Yeah.
think, is the hardest part of writing memoir. And you and I both write fiction, so with fiction, you're manipulating the whole time. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean it's always going to work that way, but you are doing this with a sense of power that you don't have in memoir. Memoir is a different kind of power. You're ripping yourself open. You're literally ripping yourself open to say, here, look inside
Mhm.
of me and look at all my, some of this ugliness, and but that's what makes memoir work.
Yeah.
That's what makes it work. Fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not sure which, but that's what makes it work is that kind of honesty and
Mhm.
revelation. I don't know about you, but I would say probably 60 to 70 memoirs in the 5 years that I was working on mine, as well as a couple books on how to write memoir. And the thing that I realized very early on is that late revelation, rawness, and honesty. That's what works.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And
That's what gives it its power, right? That's what
yeah.
gives the book its power, especially when it'll be around when you're not, or it'll be around where you're not. Somebody far from you who will never get the pleasure of talking with you in person, or on a screen in person like I am, who won't have direct contact with you, who won't ever meet you, know how lovely you are. They'll only have that book, but that book might save their life. It might open up, like, even just listening to you. I can't wait to read it. By the way, if you want beta readers, call
Oh,
me.
okay.
Seriously, like, I know you've already got agents and editors, but seriously, I think, I am fascinated by your story. I want to learn about your journey. I want to learn about your condition and the different treatments, and hoping this next one works. I'm all in on your story, and I haven't even read it. Okay, so your
Oh,
story,
thank you.
I think the sense of purpose. Here's what helped me through my 5-year, excruciating memoir journey. And I think this already, is what keeps me going. What kept me going is, I'm not writing this for me. You're not writing it for you. Beyond the
No.
therapeutic parts of writing, because we're writers. So
Yeah.
that's what we were given at birth to cope with everything. But you're not writing it for you. And what kept me going was being reminding myself why I was writing it. I was writing it to maybe help somebody else.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Because I remember, like when doctors were just saying that it was all anxiety causing my symptoms, but at that point I was actually reading Susanna Callahan's memoir, Brain on Fire, and she has, I don't know if you've read it, but she has a different type of autoimmune encephalitis. And I
Mm.
was reading that memoir at that time, and I'd never come across like any of these sort of brain inflammation conditions before. But her memoir is all about how she suddenly, like all her behavior and personality changed because of her brain inflammation. And I just happened to be reading it at that time when like I had all of this going on, and it was that made me think, oh, maybe I've got brain inflammation as well. So her book was what inspired me to ask my doctors to be tested for it, and then they found that that was what I had as well. So yeah, like I'm definitely writing my memoir for other people, like you say, because I want to raise awareness of these conditions. And also there's like this huge sort of what's the word? Like in the UK, PANS, which is the child form of this brain inflammation, it isn't recognised as a sort of physical condition. And like I've been speaking to a lot of people in the UK who've got children with PANS, and um, their parents say that the NHS are very reluctant to treat them for this brain inflammation because they're saying that it's purely like mental health, and a lot of them end up being sort of like sectioned and put into psychiatric wards for several years until the parents can get them out and get them to a private doctor. And there is just so much sort of like there's like the NHS often don't support like the treatment for PANS either in children, and it makes me wonder how many people like have these children with this condition that can be relatively simply treated if it's caught early on, and they might not even know that their child has got it because if they like believe what they're being told by the doctors that it is just a mental health problem, then the brain inflammation is just going to keep getting worse. And I have spoken to several people because I've been linked into the PANS UK charity through my writing work, and they interviewed me about sort of my experiences as an adult. And I've spoken to several parents there who said like it took them 7 or 8 years before they got like the correct diagnosis for their child. But by that point, it was like extremely difficult to treat the brain inflammation. So yeah, sort of like raising awareness of these conditions is like a huge motivating factor for me in writing this memoir. So I think you're right, but I've just got to like focus on like the reason why I'm writing it rather than sort of like worry about what other people are
Yes,
gonna think.
I think so. I mean, the more you
Mm.
talk, I'm thinking that your book should be for those medical professionals who
Mhm.
are open, or who might be stumped, and that, maybe they're not being stubborn, maybe they just don't know. I mean, I think
Yeah.
your book could be life and world changing for a whole lot of people, including like somebody like me. When I read about it, then I'll know more about it. So if I ever encounter it or the possibility or maybe the symptoms in somebody I know or I'm talking to on social media or something, I'd say, hey, you know what? This might be. I mean, so you're really performing a massive public service. No pressure. But I'm serious. And I think, again, I come back to, I believe, Madeline, that is the ultimate purpose and power of memoir.
Yeah.
Right? That is the ultimate. Let's say a doctor's child or spouse or parent or friend picks it up, and you know how the universe works. So you have to put it out there so it can do its work.
Mm-hmm.
Because at a certain point, and this is crazy, and I can't, it's a certain point in your writing, and for me rewriting, the memoir stops being about you.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to describe when or how that happens, or predict or control it, but you realize that when you stay grounded in that sense of bigger purpose, it stops being, well, this is my story, this is about me. Like, one of the catalysts for my memoir, believe it or not,
Mm-hmm.
that just started existing when I started writing it, is I have several friends, African American women my age, who suddenly, and I think for them very unexpectedly, have racially mixed grandchildren. Okay. And I know, I can tell, I know these people in person, and I know they don't say anything negative, but I can see they're kind of like, oh, I was really hoping, anyway. This is not something they ever expected. And some of them have said in reviews that my book is really helping them. And one really close friend who I had in mind the whole time I was writing it, and we've never talked about it or acknowledged it in conversation or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And she said in her review of the book, she said, well, I'm reading it so for my grandchildren, and then I'm going to give it to my son and his wife so they can read this. That's why I wrote it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so it's really not about TaRessa per se. It's about, here's one journey, and but it's a journey that hasn't been made public before or talked about before or shown or depicted before. So at least it's one little attempt to diversify the narrative. And yours is doing something even more. I mean, yours is so critical if we think about it. I mean, there may be people all over that, just like the woman's memoir helped you, saying, oh, maybe I have that, let me go get tested, which possibly saved your life. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
Have you spoken with her?
No. I have tried to get in contact with her, but yeah, I haven't had any response yet. But like, I have written some personal essays about my experience, and they've been published by different publications, and I have had people reading them contact me to say that they hadn't heard of this condition, but it's like spurred them to look at it in terms of like their son. Like, I was contacted by a lady in Zambia who said that she read my personal essay and about all like the symptoms that I'd had, like because I was getting like loss of balance, I couldn't stand up, I just kept falling over as well. And like, she said that the same thing happened to her son as well, and like it was that made her realize that what he had wasn't just like social anxiety about going outside, like he physically could not sort of stay upright long enough to walk. So yeah, it's like, so I know that just from like one of my personal essays that someone else has now been diagnosed and is now getting treatment because of it. So yeah, that is like hugely motivating to sort of like get this book finished. But I am finding it such like a drain writing it, because it's just very intense, and it's like putting me back in that mindset of it. Because like, although I'm still quite unwell with brain inflammation now, I'm so much better than I was at the start of all this. And like, reading over the bits where I was like really unwell with it, it's really sort of like emphasizing to me the difference between like then and now. So I do find it quite like heavy going, sort of working on it, but it's just such an important story. And yeah, I'm really pleased I did write Captive though, and really sort of like my therapy writings first of all, because without having done that, I don't think I would then be writing a full length like narrative piece. So yeah, what advice have you got for like other writers who want to maybe start writing a memoir then?
Good question and great transition. I would say I'd start with what we just talked about. I would start with, even if you don't find the answer until you're well into writing, really, really make a point of trying to figure out your why and the bigger purpose for your book.
Yeah.
Okay, why the purpose? Why are you writing this book? The reason and the purpose and the audience. I think that is the most important thing for memoir. Because memoir, as you know, regardless of what aspect of your life you're focusing on, it's so personal that
Yeah.
it can feel indulgent. It can feel narcissistic. It can feel, sometimes you're so close to it, you literally, I have no idea. Is this in? Is this out? Does it even matter? You know, that's why I needed a whole team of folks giving me feedback, right? That feedback really, really was absolutely critical. But the first thing I would do is, like I said, even if you don't know the answer, use the process of planning and crafting and writing your memoir to figure out what your bigger why is.
Yeah,
I think that's
that's
the most important thing.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, like I think it's also just like you were saying to me, just sort of like don't be afraid as well. Like I think that's like a huge thing because like a lot of like the time when I've been writing this, I've sort of been held back a bit by fear. And yeah, we need to sort of like think about why we're writing, as you were saying, and sort of like just place our fear aside. And yeah, like we just need to
Or
sort of
wait a
like
minute,
be on.
use the fear, because fear
Yeah.
makes us human.
Hmm.
We hate fear, we hate vulnerability, but those things, let's face it, there's nothing that connects us faster as humans. Right now, we're all experiencing, the planet is experiencing fear and vulnerability
Hmm.
about a virus.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's making people closer, ironically, if not physically, than on a different level. That we have there are barriers that might have existed before, social barriers that are now we just zip on through them. How you doing? How you hanging? How you know? Da, 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 are you spraying bleach on your groceries? You know, those kinds of things. We're having a common experience all at the same
Mhm.
time, unprecedented, at least in recent years, right? So because it's global. So, you know, yes. The other thing is, I think in your case, I have a question, which is,
Okay.
are you also working with like a therapist or counselor to help you process those tough stretches? So you're not all alone. And so you got somebody who's, who can kind of help you through that, because I would think that that would possibly be helpful.
Yeah, so I have had several therapists sort of like in the last year helping me deal with the impact of a brain inflammation, but they were all NHS therapists, and there's like this huge divide in the NHS about treating mental health. You either treat mental health or you treat a physical problem, and the brain inflammation obviously overlaps the two areas.
You're
So
holistic approach.
that's just not really sort of like supported by the NHS. So like I had one therapist tell me that what the sort of like physical problem that was causing all of this sort of distress and everything that I was trying to problem, and she was a mental health therapist. She wasn't allowed to keep seeing me because that's what her boss had told her. And yeah, with the I was then referred on to a therapist who specializes in sort of the impact of physical conditions. And she told me that after like 2 sessions it was with her, that she couldn't like help me process sort of the trauma and like the traumatic nature of it, because she is only trained for sort of like the physical impact of like physical conditions. So she said like most of her patients have like heart disease, and it's all about sort of like helping them like at an occupational therapy level. So I've sort of like found that I've been sort of like between these two camps, where there's people who help with therapy on a physical level, or there's people on a mental health level, but I haven't been able to access anyone through the NHS who can help me sort of like understand like the psychiatric and the neurological aspects of the brain inflammation. So yeah, I have found that even just like writing it all out as like in the memoir forms has been sort of like therapeutic for me, but I am still like searching for like a therapist or a counselor who says that they can help me in that way, because I've just found it's out of so many people's comfort zone. Like even talking about it, like some of my friends just like don't want to talk about it with me at all because it makes them uncomfortable. And it's really difficult because I'm sort of like caught between these two like areas. So yeah, but like I am starting sort of like private treatment soon, so like I'm hoping to get like further on with that. So, but
So
yeah,
when
and like
you
obviously
say
with
that, okay,
sorry,
I'm sorry. When you say that, I have a couple ideas. Take them
okay,
or leave them. Take them or leave them seriously. As you're talking, I am picturing you, whether on video or in person or both. First of all, I want to, if it makes sense, I think that you should include this in the book.
mm-hmm.
What you just said, you just did a brilliant breakdown. Of course, I don't understand the National Health Service. That's what it stands for, NHS, at
Yeah,
all, because I'm over here in the U.S. with our shenanigans of the healthcare system. So we're looking at yours like, but isn't that better? But listen, we know. So, but you just described something very profound, and I'm sure it impacts many, many people with many,
mm-hmm.
many different kinds of situations and conditions. I want to encourage you to put what you just said into the book. And while you were doing this, I'm picturing you doing public talks and presenting to NHS,
Okay,
advocating for them to start understanding the holistic
mm-hmm.
connection of brain, body, spirit, emotion, heart. You know, we all know that.
Yeah,
It could really be this could be world changing. I
yeah.
mean, that's what
So
I'm seeing and hearing as you're talking. Literally, I'm picturing you talking to these experts and saying, you know, you've got to get past this. In this way, this is our books are similar. What my
mm-hmm.
tagline is living and in a world of either or. Well, just relates to racial identity on a black-white binary.
Mm-hmm.
Yours is, as I said, super urgent for probably many, many people with let's stop being so either or with it, where it's either just strictly a physical condition as if the brain is a part of my body, or a quote unquote mental health issue as if my body is a part of my brain, and the emotions and the situations. I mean, I, I'm serious. Like, I really see when you talk about your why, I'm hoping you really include this conversation or your take on it in there, because I think that's almost maybe a whole chapter,
I
Madeline.
definitely will now then. Yeah.
No, I'm
Mm-hmm.
so excited because I'm like, people need to hear it. And, you know, communication, we know that's why we write, why we communicate, the right doctors or people who run the NHS or something, you never know. You chip away, you tilt at windmills, but you never know when it's, going to be that game changer, that
Mm-hmm.
tipping point, as Malcolm Gladwell talks about, right? You never know. Your talk, your book, your article, your essay, your poem could be the tipping point that makes them go, maybe we should think about a different approach.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think your story has the power to potentially do that.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. No, I'm so like, wow, what a gift you're giving the world.
So,
Seriously.
oh, thank you. Yeah, this is like, even just this conversation is really motivating me more to like keep writing it and just sort of like to finish it as soon as possible. So, yeah,
Well,
thank
finish it
you.
when you can. I know you got external pressures on the deadline. One thing I learned about memoir, I didn't expect mine to take 5 years because I'm like, oh, I can knock this out. No,
Yeah.
the book writes you. That's what I want to end with. When you're doing memoir, the book writes you.
Yeah.
Just you already know what I mean.
Yeah,
You're
definitely.
not really writing the book. The book is writing you.
Yeah. We just,
Yeah,
yeah, we think we're in control of it, but we're not in that sort of
not at
sense.
all.
So, yeah. So yeah, we're coming up to like the end of the time now. So, but yeah, this has been a really great conversation. So thank you so much for joining me. Should we just finish by telling viewers where they can find our memoirs? Do you want to go first?
Certainly, but let me just also say thank you. This has been an honor just because you are so delightful and wonderful, but also because I am so geeked about your book
Oh,
and
thank
about your
you.
work. Oh, I'm serious though. Like I am like, oh my gosh, she's gonna change the world. She's gonna help so many people. Swirl Girl, my book, Swirl Girl, Coming of Race in the USA. I'm showing you the cover. You can get it on Amazon.com. You can also get it on the publisher's website because we're publishing independently, which is my name, TaRessa Stovall, all one word, lowercase.com. And they see it on the screen. So it's just one word, all lowercase, TaRessaStovall.com. I'm on Facebook, TaRessa Stovall, And on Twitter and Instagram is at TaRessa Talks, at TaRessa Talks, TALKS, one word. But yeah, TaRessaStovall.com for Swirl Girl, Coming of Race in the USA, a memoir of identity and race, and a look at how all of us take these journeys to find out who we are and where we fit in the world.
Okay, great. Yeah, like I can't wait to read your memoir. So yeah, I'm just really excited
Thank
about
you.
that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my book, Captive, there it is. I keep forgetting where the camera is every time I hold something up.
I know.
Yeah. So yeah, Captive, a poetry collection on OCD, psychosis, and brain inflammation, because that's its subtitle. Oh, there we go. Yeah, that's available sort of like Amazon or the major online retailers. It is in paperback format, and I think there's an ebook as well for it. So yeah, and like libraries, I know a lot of them are now sort of like doing like e-lending as well because of like the pandemic. So
Right.
yeah, like I know that libraries, they were stocking the paperback, so I think that in these conditions with the current climate, you can get like the ebook through libraries as well.
Yes, and we have an ebook as well on the publisher's website,
Okay, that's great.
which is
So
TaRessaStovall.com. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Madeline. You are so delightful, and I'm just so excited honored, excited about you and your work, and looking forward. And let's definitely stay in touch. And thank you to everyone. Thank you so much to everyone. We
Yeah,
really appreciate you, and we do all of this for you.
yeah, that's a great thing to finish with.